Thank you very much. I'm actually very honored and privileged to be here. It's been a while since I've been in an auditorium. It's a little bit daunting. I see my old professor over there. Thank you very much. Who's the person who actually introduced me to artificial intelligence. So if anything I'm saying it's not good, it's his fault. He didn't teach me right. Let me start by giving you the idea of this keynote, industry keynote, is to give you some insight from an industry perspective about recommendations. And this is about recommendations in a social network. And the idea of doing one step at a time is to really think it through from the beginning. So let me give you a little bit of context. LinkedIn's, maybe I should turn it on. LinkedIn's mission is to connect the world, the professional, to make them more productive and successful. LinkedIn's vision is to create economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce. Now, I'm a mathematician. I don't necessarily know what is the difference between a vision and a mission, but there's a fundamental one. The vision is something that you aspire to. It's a true north. It's something that you may not be ever able to achieve. The mission is something that's rather concrete, that you can put a metric behind and see your progress around. In this situation, the vision is really about the global workforce. It means everybody on the planet. And trust me, when I started at LinkedIn 8 years ago, and LinkedIn started about 12 years ago, that was really out there. It was a crazy dream that we had. Not only does it say about the global workforce being everywhere on the planet, but it's every member of that global workforce. It's not just white-collar job, it's not blue-collar job, it's not just et cetera, it's for everyone. And the idea is to create economic opportunity in the sense that it's in a professional environment. To do so, we're endeavoring into building the economic graph. And what does that mean? It's a digital representation of the economy. At one side, you have a digital representation of your profile, who you are. And the lady from IBM described it a little bit yesterday, Alexandra. Thank you. It's a way that you professionally represent yourself to the entire globe. 20 years ago, before the internet, that was kind of hard to do. Then originally, the early days, you would buy a URL, and that was who you were. Then you maybe thought about Wikipedia. It turns out that LinkedIn has become the de facto platform where you represent yourself professionally. What is it that I've accomplished in my professional career? Another aspect of the economic graph, and we have roughly about 380 million, and it's growing, which again, early on at LinkedIn was a dream that we thought we would never reach. Then you have a digital representation of every companies where you have these economic opportunities, and roughly the platform has about 7 million today. So it's not just Fortune 1000, it's small and medium businesses, mom and pop shops, et cetera, et cetera. It's also a digital representation of every jobs, which every opportunity that you can have within those companies. A digital representation of every skills in order for you to be successful into these jobs and to be able to perform within those opportunities. A digital representation of every learning institution where you can acquire these jobs, and a digital representation of every bits of knowledge. So we're attempting to build all of this, so then we as recommenders step in and say, you know what, we're going to let intellectual capital or capital of all sorts flow through this graph to create these economic opportunities. That's a little bit at the high level. Now from an individual's perspective, what is it that I'm getting at? If I'm a LinkedIn user, why would I ever do so? So the idea is to connect to opportunity. If you fire my cell phone and click on the LinkedIn app, why am I doing it? So the goal is to connect you to those economic opportunities. What does it mean? Really, it's like, for a member, there are 3 dimensions. It's to connect with your professional network, to say, okay, how can I help my network? What is it that I can bring? What is my expertise that I can bring to help them? And what is it that individuals with their own expertise is sharing stuff with me back? It's also staying informed in that sense. Again, it's in a professional environment. There's so many things that are out there that are super important for me to read. It's super helpful that my peers or my people in my network actually filter that information for me. And opportunity also translates into jobs. The job is at the core of the platform, if you want, at the pyramid. So that's from an individual's perspective. LinkedIn is also an enterprise software. So the values that we're bringing to the enterprise is around 4 dimensions. It's hire, market, sell, and at work. Hire, we're helping companies recruit, find the talent that is struggling to hire. We're helping companies to sell their products better. We're helping companies to market their product better, and we help them to function better as an enterprise. That's a little bit of a lengthy context about what is it that LinkedIn is all about, why we're doing this, because I believe if you don't set the context right, the forest will always be trouble. You don't know why you're doing it. And at the beginning, whenever we do in a recommender system, you need to understand why you're doing it. What is the context? So sorry for this lengthy introduction. So after the context, let's jump into building these recommendations one step at a time. And there are multiple steps that I'll go through, and some of them will probably be a little bit of a surprise. I really thought about what to say within this setting, and at times I see young individuals or senior individuals join my team and going through the interview process, and there's some things that are missing a little bit. So I'll tackle these, and then I'll dive into maybe one example. So the first thing you need to ask yourself, as a data engineer, what is your job? Why am I doing this? What is it that I'm doing? And you may believe that your job is to build the fanciest model. I have a problem, I'm going to build the best model possible ever. Or it may be that your job is to design elegant, scalable models. That's my job. Or it may be that my job is to scale my machine learning algorithms to billions and billions of records and etc., etc. That's my job. Or it may be that my job is to argue with Hadoop Dev and Ops. We are a Hadoop platform. And trust me, that happens all the time. I need more resources, I need more this, I need more that. Why don't you support this library because I need to, etc., etc. 2 years ago it was Spark. Why don't you use Spark? And then Spark wasn't really that stable. No, you can't. Yes, I want. No, you can't. Yes, I want. So maybe that's my job, right? Or my job is to argue almost religious arguments about which methodology is better. And I can say I'm the first one I'm guilty here. And you can see it around, like, is SVM the best thing? Or what about deep learning? What about simple logistic regression? What about trees? And you go back and forth. And you can see that passion that we have in the things that we do, that we argue so strongly about it. No, you have to do this. In my old days, it was in statistics, you Bayesian or you frequentist. And trust me, the dialogue doesn't really come across. Because we really almost religious arguments around it. So maybe that's your job. Well, you get the gist. Your job is actually none of this. So if it's none of this, what is it really? I'll venture to say that this is your job. Your job is to create delight in what you build for individuals that are actually going to use it. That's it. It's not the model, it's not anything. No. Create that delight, create that experience, and build it in a manner that it raises those emotions within those value propositions that you're trying to target. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. So you might say, well, then it's building models that power great products, that are delightful products. That's wrong too. It's just build great products. Because in the end, and building great models and bringing great tech is hard. Undoubtedly, it is. We can spend years and years. It is really hard. It is, quote unquote, rocket science. But building great products is even harder. And if the delight is not there at the end, you've done it for nothing. So understand what your job is. That's step one. Step two is, well, ask the question. I remember in my graduate days, I had a couple of mentors in my graduate days, and one of them always had this thing after a presentation that went nowhere. So the person would present something, their problem they're struggling with, and after 20 minutes, that individual would raise and say, wait a minute. Let me ask you just one question. If God came down, what is the question you would ask him to answer? That's it. Don't tell me how you're going to do it. Just what are you trying to do? What is the question? Now describe to you that your job is to create delight. Hey, well, we all in recommender systems, machine learning, that does not translate into any objective function that you can think about. I cannot plug that into an algorithm. This is an objective function for minimization of the constraints, which we use for our content platform. I cannot go from left to right. Point taken. But you need to think through. That delight is going to infer some product metrics, which is going to infer some relevance metrics, which is going to infer some objective functions. The key point that I want to say here is that your responsibility and to do these recommendations one step at a time is not to start and stop at the objective function. CTR, done. Next, no. Why? What CTR? Why not something else? And how is that impacting that delight up front? Yes, we're going to spend a lot of our time, a lot of our energy to build models to optimize this objective function, but that's not the be-all and end-all. Understand how you go from one to the other. And trust me, the dialogue is really hard to do. Especially if you've gone to your schools and the studies and you come back and say, I have my mathematical background, I have my toolkit, I can build my models. Great, I'm done. And then you have this dialogue between the product manager who's trying to build a product and say, oh, I want delight, I want diversity, I want magic. And you say, whoa, I didn't learn that one. But it is up to you to figure it out. Because if you don't, then you're going to optimize for something that's completely irrelevant. So understand what your job is, ask the question. That's a step 2. Step 3 is, well, where do I get my data from? And I keep on going back to this old deck that we had. So LinkedIn, I started, it was a startup, it was a small thing. So you do things very quickly. You build up services, services are going to spew data, and you're going to connect all of them. And it's an order of n squared growth. When this happens, then it becomes very intractable to figure out where your data is. And at times, what will happen is suddenly the numbers don't match. Now remember, from a machine learning perspective, you are going to use data that's going to be emitted by these things. And you need to know, okay, what happened? Where did it go? When DJ was working at LinkedIn with us, we struggled so hard to figure out just one simple thing, doing impression discounting. Because we didn't know what was impressed. Data was lost somewhere. So understand where your data is from and try to simplify it. Now, saying that everything goes through a single data pipeline is very easy to show it on the whiteboard or on the projection screen. It's very hard to do because it's a single point of failure. So if that thing in the middle is gone, then poof, your site is gone. So you need to architect it in a way that it's very efficient and very well done. We've built Kafka for this. That was the explicit purpose of it. And today it's one of our best open source projects, and it's a very extremely valuable piece of software. Thank you. It's also an order of 1 integration into Hadoop. So we actually went on to Avro when it was very, very early on, and it paid dividend in the end. Sometimes you make right choices. But the point here is understand where your data is from, and don't underestimate the difficulty of it. If you don't fix that problem, whatever algorithms you're going to do is irrelevant. Step 1, understand your job. Step 2, ask the question. Step 3, understand where your data is from. Step 4 is, well, now I understand where the data is from. What is the data that I'm getting? The semantic of that object, what is it? And I end up today believing that tracking in itself is probably the hardest problem that I've ever done at LinkedIn. I scaled the social graph, and that was hard. It kept me awake at night. We've built fancy models, extraordinary things, and that was hard too. Tracking, I believe, is the hardest of them all. Let me spend a little bit of time here. Tracking has three components: producers, transport, consumers. Producers is these applications that would run, let's say, on your mobile platform, on the desktop, and they're going to emit events. Those are the producers. Transport is, okay, so now it's in the data pipeline. I'm going to take that thing and I'll transport it somewhere else. And consumers is, well, let's say, mostly you'll be a consumer, you'll get that data and build models from it. The pain in the neck in tracking is there's an asymmetry of concern between the producer and the consumer. If I'm a front-end application developer, I'm building this application. I'm going to make it great. I'm going to make it work really well. When you click on the button, the next thing comes up and it's perfectly done. It's beautiful. I have no idea what tracking I need to do. It's the experience that I want. I want to make it flow very nice. Downstream, the consumer is, well, I don't know what you need to put into your code, but I need to get my tracking in order to make your code better. And these two worlds don't really understand the complexity of each other. In the end, you end up by having systems that are extremely brittle, because they break somewhere in the middle just because you didn't understand why it mattered. There's also this compatibility issue. Today, you think you're brilliant, you're going to build something, you're going to actually create a very nice data schema, you're going to populate it very well, there'll be strings here, strings there. And then 3 years down the road, you say, oh my God, that was such a bad decision. Forward compatibility is impossible, right? I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow. So if now you want to change, good luck. Because tracking is everywhere. So adjusting and having that flexibility is hard. Because if you don't, the pain points are going to be in a lot of places. I mean, on the client side, we can figure out what the pain point is. You want to have a fast experience. A delightful experience on the mobile browser is fast. If I click on a button, I need to wait 10 seconds for anything to happen. What would happen? Yeah, I'll do something else, right? That's not a delightful experience. So it needs to be super fast. So if you want to have a complete, fully fledged tracking at the mobile level, and that client then sends stuff to the backend servers, it's a payload that's humongous. And I'm going to use now your data plan for it. Well, that's not a delightful experience too. So you might say, well, let's just do it the server-side tracking and not client-side tracking. But if you do this, I don't know what you've seen. I don't know, I can't do impression discount. Because I don't know whether you actually saw that object, because guess what? In order to make it fast for you, I'm going to prefetch a lot of stuff from the backend server. So the experience that you're going to experience as an individual is going to be super fast. So payload is a pain. Then in the middle, you have kind of intractable thing, because you have multiple applications, and this is actually a real example that we've had at one point of time at LinkedIn, which we fix and we're fixing. In the page view event, there are multiple ways to define a job view. There's the job ID, there's the job ID written slightly differently, there's a job ID again written slightly differently, and there's this thing about 11 or 13. So now imagine if you're the ETL team, and before you see this thing 11 or this thing 13, you parse that string, you parse it everything, and you start incrementing the count, and you can do all your stuff. Now, the front-end team builds up a new application, let's say the job view application, and then in that application, the page view event for job ID is written with the string 11. What? It has nothing to do with job ID in the string. I cannot parse it. Now, you on the other end, you're the consumer where you're trying to optimize for job views. Well, guess what? You're going to miss all of these events. They're just not going to be there. That's what I mean by it's brittle. It's extremely complicated to actually follow. So understand what your job is, ask the right question, know where your data is from, not know what type of data you're getting. So that's, we're already at step 4. So that's already starting to be a lot of steps. Is that it? Well, of course not. Invest and need to figure out how you're going to train, build, and deploy your models. LinkedIn, our platform is Hadoop, and we made that choice about 6 years ago. We could have chosen another one. But fundamentally, those are always going to be the components of any platform that you're going to have. I need to train my model. In order to train my model, I need to prepare the data. Now, I already spent a lot of time to understand what is the data that I've got. It's ETL right, it's everything in the right place. And now I sample it and I create snapshots. Once I create snapshots, then I can start building a training pipeline. On a training pipeline, you'll start with your new extraordinary feature, and you do maybe model selections, you fit, and the algorithm that we mostly use is ADMM, because most of our models are still logistic regression, and they work very well. You put that all through your pipeline. It's a tremendous piece of quote-unquote technology that you need to build in order to make it fast. And at the end, you have a model that you can deploy. But this is for a modeler or machine learner or data scientist. You're going to spend a lot of time in that world, because this is the place where you start innovating about feature engineering, for example, or try to do different things. And most of the experiences that you're going to do here are never going to make it to the site, because you try to understand, you play with things around. Which means that having snapshots, it's super critical. Because if I don't have snapshot, I cannot do replays of what happened on the site. I don't know whether what you've done with your algorithm is going to work better. Because the world changes as it moves along. So if you want to compare your metric or your performance to what happened on the best model, well, you better compare it apples to apples. And that's why snapshotting is critical. And then you want to just deploy it. I click a button, push, deploy, done, I can go home. Well, that's also very hard, because guess what? Maybe your feature is not on the site. It's a feature set, something very complex and complicated that you can't compute. So you can go through these Kappa architecture, Lambda architecture to sort of create these, but they're just not there, so you need to build them. Ideally, pushing a model is just a config change, if the feature is there. And even then, you need to sort of significantly make sure that you're doing the right thing. Because if you push a model that's complex to compute, the online hardware that's going to actually serve that online is going to be maybe taxed, and suddenly the machines get too hot and they fail, and your experience is certainly not delightful. So understand all that pipelines: train, evaluate, test, and deploy. Okay, now we're done. We can do our job, right? I know what my job is. I know what the question is that I'm trying to solve. I know what the data is. I know what form it has. I can train models. I can push a key. Done. And not exactly. Yeah, eventually I'll stop. Don't worry about it. Not exactly. You need to have an experimental way to do things. That's a foundation of scientific progress. If you want, you create experience. The interesting thing about our world is, and we had to struggle at that at LinkedIn for quite a long time. You would have, for example, a product team builds an experience, and now it's running out there on the site, and they turn around to the relevance engineer or recommendation system. Hey, now make it relevant. Hey, and I want a model next week. You're like, wait a minute. I don't know what you're trying to do. What? I need to go through all these steps to figure it out. It turns out that if on the x-axis I have time, and on the y-axis I have model performance, at the beginning what you'll do is, it's not going to be better, because you just have no idea how it actually truly functions. So that ramp-up phase is for you. You start learning, you start building up your models, trying to tune, to understand. And once you've done that, then you can start accelerating through the loop of model deployment, which is kind of this aggressive growth. And after a certain amount of time, the utility function is kind of curving down, so you might stop and you go in maintenance mode. And over time, when you're in the maintenance mode, the model performance is going to go down. But you need to be experimental driven and iterate. Building model A and then going home and not doing it anymore, it's not going to sustain. But in order to do that, you also need to have an A/B online testing platform. If you don't, then you'll be blind. And fundamentally, it goes because offline success on your model does not guarantee online success. There are a lot of things that you can do online that you cannot do offline that just don't work. And when you look at the experimental platform and the result, look at all the things, not just the thing that interests you. Like quite often I see a team that's optimizing, let's say, for job views. They're doing great. Or there's a profile edits. So that was a real use case. So we build the profile page to get great views, so that it would actually be nice to edit. It turned out that it basically killed the revenue from that page. So what do you do now? Well, the profile team is very happy about it. The revenue team isn't. Is it a delightful experience? I don't know. Go back and figure it out. But make sure that when you're looking at the stuff that you're moving, the needle that you're moving, it's not just in a compartmentalized view, that it's also global. So now we had step number 6. Know your job. Pose the right question. Know where the data is coming from. Know what form it has. Understand how you train, build, and deploy models. And sure as hell have an experimental framework in mindset as you're building models. So I'm done, right? 6 steps, not too many to think about. And there's one more. And trust me, that's the last one. Engineering best practices. That's why I have the word data engineer and not data science or data science, because I want to actually accentuate a little bit that aspect. What I mean by this is that when I hear on LinkedIn quite often, the complaints of a data scientist, it's always about, well, where's my data? Well, I can't make sense of it, or et cetera, et cetera. And at the bottom, you have kind of process. I want to try things fast. What you're doing here is inhibiting my innovation ability. So you have all these complaints, but you certainly shy away from documenting what you do, updating and maintaining when your code is actually running or your model is on the site, and just monitoring it. And we all actually suffering from this. I can remember when I was in that band, and you build your models, you think that you're very clever, it works super well, your code is not documented, nobody knows about it, you go on vacation, you come back, you have absolutely no idea what you did. You look at your code and like, whoa, wait, that cannot be right. And then you spend 2 weeks trying to rebuild it, to re-understand it, and then it makes sense again. But as you did this, you did not document the code anyway, which means that if you go again on vacation, you come back, it will be back to square zero. And if you have trouble understanding what you're building, guess what? Others will certainly have much more problems. And in the end, if that happens, they'll just rebuild it, right? In the same way, and it's kind of the self-fulfilling prophecy. What I'm saying is really that it's not just engineering best practices, it's scientific best practices. We all stand on shoulders of giants. We all stand on shoulders of giants. But guess what? People will also stand on your shoulders. You're not alone when you're building this. You will eventually become part of the giants. So in that case, make sure that whatever you've built, others can extend. And really understand this fundamentally, that it's not we're asking you to do code reviews or keep this so safe someplace, have unit tests around your code, etc., not to make your life miserable. It's just to make sure that if you do something, it's not breaking somebody else. If you change the ETL for your little thing to within the whole page view event, that somebody else's job is not failing. Then on top of it, understand that we all reinvent things that are interesting, the great features. At LinkedIn, we probably have 4 or 5 connection values scored. We are a social network. So you're trying to understand what is the relationship between 2 individuals and how can I leverage that within my algorithm? Because it's a great feature. And anybody taking any problem within any of the recommendation systems that we have at LinkedIn will eventually get into, yeah, I need to build that one. It's also a very cool feature to build. That it's been built already 4 times. I'm not saying that you should not build it a 5th time, but at least try to figure out whether the other ones are what you need. And if they can be slightly tweaked to do what you need, well, put it back in the pool so that everybody can actually use it. Now you have feature discovery, which is a problem. And the other one is, one of the reasons that I have the word data engineer is that at some time, which was about 3 or 4 years ago, it was actually fascinating. So you're interviewing individuals and you ask them, what drives you? What do you want to do? And they say, well, building cool code, etc., etc. Great, fine. At one point of time in that dialogue, it always comes up, I want to do something that has an impact. I want to do something that has an impact. I want to play in an area that's impactful, that it's relevant. And the discussion goes on, and then a little bit later on, it's like, whoa, but I don't want to carry a pager. That's for engineers. Engineers carry pagers. I'm a scientist. I don't want to carry a pager. And I couldn't figure it out. And I said, wait a minute. If you want to do something that's impactful, and it's running these delightful experiences, and they break, wouldn't you want to fix it? Because it's impactful. It matters. So if it's broken, fix it. Don't just throw it over the wall and see what happens. No, take care to deliver that delight, not just the optimization function. It happened to us, and that's a real, granted, it was a very long time ago when we were a startup, much smaller, trying to think we didn't really know what we were doing. At one point of time, we had jobs on LinkedIn, and we said, wouldn't it be cool that if you post a job, I tell you who are individuals that would match that job in the same process. So that way I can accelerate the hire. So if I'm a hiring manager, I want to hire for this job, I give you great candidates. By the way, you posted this job, here are the great candidates, so why don't you, next step, very quickly. A brilliant idea, so Monica hacked something together, it was working well on her laptop, it was working great. Then one weekend she closes the laptops and goes home. And all hell breaks loose. Because at that point in time, you had a salesperson that was trying to sell jobs to someone, at a client, and say, hey, by the way, once you post a job, check this out. You can find individuals that would match. But that was running out of her laptop, which he just closed, and it didn't work. Uh-oh. You're not alone. You're riding on the shoulders of giants. So these are only 7 steps. 1, understand your job, ask the right question, ask the question about why you're doing it. Figure out where your data is from, figure out what form that data has, understand how you're actually building and deploying models, what are the intricacies through it, create that delightful experience, yes, but have the experimental mind frame, and adhere to engineering scientific best practices. Because I would contend that if you miss one of them, this is what you get. Garbage in, garbage out. We used to have that saying in statistics because if you do the survey wrong, etc., then it doesn't matter what you do, you can't really recover from it. I'll tell you that at LinkedIn, at one point of time, ads targeting was operating as observed CTR. That was the target criteria. I just pick the ad that has the biggest observed CTR and I'll show it to you. So we are all machine learners, we build relevance engineers, recommender systems, we've been all to these conferences, we can beat that, there's no problem, we can do much better than this. So we endeavored into building a very nice, complex systems with the best technology that was out there, best models, we read all the literature and we thought, yeah, we love it. 9 months later, we couldn't beat OCTR. And it's not because the model was so fancy, we just couldn't beat it. We would do it offline, it works. 2 days later, it doesn't work anymore. And we didn't know. And the reason for that is we had a ton of lossiness in our data. We didn't pay attention to it. We didn't pay attention to how we were sampling the requests that we were going to actually feed to our recommender system. And that is always occurring. So garbage in, garbage out if you miss one of the steps. Now in the end, we do it because, well, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Because there's something great that we can achieve. We can build those relevant experiences that will create delight. So I covered starting with the context. I gave you the step-by-step what you need to pay attention to. And let's look at this, why we're having fun doing it, making that difference. And as I thought about it, I tried to think about some example. I said maybe I should talk about people you may know. How we're building the people you may know algorithm. It's a thing that LinkedIn invented about 9 years ago. It's recommending individuals to connect. And this was my experience a little while ago. And sometimes it can be uncannily good. I mean, really good. The first choice here is my wife. At that time, I wasn't connected to my wife on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn tells me, maybe you should connect to your wife. You're like, whoa, wait a minute. Freaky. I know the algorithm, so I know exactly why, but still, right? Now, I don't know who the second one is, But the first one was a great choice. So I could talk about that. Decided not to. I could talk about the feed. How do you actually create that feed? Because that one is actually extraordinary in complexity. If you think about it, there are lots of different types of things that we're showing you, and there's an ad also. How do you actually build that? How do you put that all into one place? What are all the factors that are going to actually participate into building that delightful experience? It's really, really hard. There's one part that's slightly harder, which is how do you communicate with your members? LinkedIn is sending things out on your behalf, on LinkedIn's behalf, to members. Let's say if I want to connect to someone, I'm going to send him an invitation to connect. You're going to get it as an email. If you are part of a group, you'll get a group digest. So you start getting a lot of emails. You sort of getting a lot of communications from LinkedIn, right? And I'm pretty much, as I'm describing this example, in your mind, you're like, yeah, but you're not doing such a great job. So you always like to come and be part of urban culture. I'll read it. Homer Simpson, it's in its 26th season, I believe, and it reads, "Oh God gets your prayers." But he just clicks delete without reading them, like email updates from LinkedIn. And if you're like, man, I made it, I'm part of urban culture. Well, not really. You don't want to be part of that. It's really hard. It's a hard problem because on top of it's kind of a problem like the feed. It's multiple types of type that I want to send to you. But on top of it, I also have a lot of missing data. I don't know whether you open it, whether you delete it or not, because the mail provider doesn't provide you that back. Then if you think about it, well, the world is moving away from emails, right? On this thing over here, I'm getting text, SMSs, and what's not. I'm not getting emails, so when do I do one, when I do the other one? An SMS costs, an email doesn't, etc., etc. It's getting complicated. So I could talk about this. But I decided to talk about jobs. And the reason for this is because I believe there's an impact that we can make. And I know that yesterday I spent a lot of time around my table describing what is kind of my vision around it. Because it's really hard. And if you think about online talent platforms, what I mean by this is these online things that match people to jobs or give you an impression of what are the jobs or the skills that you should navigate, create online marketplaces, help hiring manager hire. If you use that space as an online talent platforms, it turns out with a recent study by the McKinsey Global Institute that the impact is roughly $2.7 trillion. I don't know what that means. It's a huge number. It's the GDP of England today, of United Kingdom. And by 2025, the potential impact of this platform is to raise the GDP, the global GDP, by $2.5 trillion. Whoa, that's a lot of money. I'm not an economist, but it's a lot of money. But on the other hand, what I found more interesting, it can impact between 540 million individuals, between 540 and 850 million individuals. 540 million individuals. I grew up in Switzerland. At that time, Switzerland had 6 million people. My village has 3 million people, and it seemed to be huge. This number is 100 times roughly the size of Switzerland at that time. And I have a potential to positively impact their lives. Why would I want to sell ads? Why don't I work on that problem? Right? Let me give you another hint as to why you should. The Gallup Institute in 2013 did a survey of the state of the global workforce, and it categorized individuals in 3 buckets. People that are engaged, people that are very passionate about what they do at work and they're driving innovation and productivity for that company. People that are not engaged, that are sort of like, yeah, I just stamp in when I go in work and stamp out when I leave. And people that are actively disengaged. Not only do I hate my job, but I'm going to do anything that I can do within the realm of not being caught to sink the company. So they went and actually defined it this way. So the first time I read this report, I said, what? So here's a quiz for you. I know all of you has a piece of paper, so take the time. What proportion of the global state, the global workforce is engaged? Just write that number for you. Just put it someplace. Write it on a piece of paper. Then ask yourself, how many more people are engaged compared to actively disengaged? What is the ratio between these two? Write it on a piece of paper, put the country you're from, and if you could be so kind, just give it back to me at the end of this presentation. So take 30 seconds. What is the proportion of engaged? And what is the ratio of engaged to disengaged? I'm going to give the answer, don't worry about it, but just think about it. What should that be? Engaged? And ratio between engaged to disengaged. Just think on it. Okay. Thank you very much for your thought process. Could have stretched a little bit in between. The answer is, there's only 13% of the global workforce that are engaged. 13%. If you pick a company at random, only one individual in that company is actually passionate about what he or she is doing and driving it forward. 1 out of 10, roughly. Oh, that's good news. It used to be 11%. So statistically significantly better, right? Only 13%. So what is the ratio? Well, it turns out that the ratio is 2 to 1 in disfavor of the engaged. For every individual at random in the global workforce in a company that you pick, that is engaged, there will be 2 that are actively disengaged. So you're working hard to make the company better, and there are 2 people that are holding you back. Right? 2 to 1. So then, of course, when I looked at this, I said, no, that cannot be. Or it must be because of some country's effect. Well, let's look into some country's effect. So here's from that, it's still from the same study. I didn't do it. I'm just quoting them. Israel, 5% of the global workforce is engaged, and 22% is actively disengaged. 4 to 1. You might think that you're better. Japan, 7% engaged, 24% actively disengaged. France, 9% engaged, 26% disengaged. Austria is doing actually rather well. It's 14 and 12. So they're more actively engaged, positively engaged than negatively engaged individuals in Austria. Germany, it's not the case anymore. And the winners, the most engaged, is actually Costa Rica. There are 33% of engaged individuals in the global workforce in Costa Rica. Pura vida. Right? It's not just a motto. You're enjoying your life. That's it. It actually shows. It turns out that actually the US is very high, which was very surprising to me. And Australia is. Those are actually the 3, I think, in the winners. There might be one country between Australia and the US, but the US and Costa Rica are really up there. So we have an issue. People are working on some job that they don't like, obviously. And I can have any positive impact on 540 million individuals. That's humongous as an impact that you can have. Creating that delight, if we could, wouldn't that be kind of a karmic circle then later on? So if you dig in a little bit to this, and this is from the McKinsey Global Institute, and it's actually on our data. One of the reasons that the people feel disengaged or not engaged is that the job that they're currently having is not really leveraging their expertise, it's not really challenging them, it doesn't have this thing. I'm like, no. In Japan, that ratio is 49%. In the US, it's roughly 36. So the numbers are really high. So if you take that, and if you can look at the liquidity in the market, the job market liquidity, which I didn't know what it was really a short while ago, about a year ago, it's the number is really computed. The proxy here is, within the last year, how many people, quote unquote, changed jobs? The number of individuals that the tenure is less than a year. And it turns out that it's actually decreasing. And in countries like as Japan, it's extremely low. So it turns out that if I interpret this correctly, is I'm doing a job, I'm not changing, I can't change a job, and I'm miserable at it. Now that may be all fine, but parallel to that, the theory tells you that if you have this liquidity, then it has a tremendous positive impact on both the employer and the employee. And it is true, you can all see it. Individuals that join your company bring a new thing to it. And that's exactly what Reid was going about, Reid Hoffman, our founder, behind the Alliance. He said, I have a contract with you for 4 years to grow your talent and to maybe letting you go later on, but I have a responsibility within these 4 years to teach you, to make you think about other things, not necessarily the job that you're currently doing. Now this might be, okay, fine, there's no jobs, right? Of course, I can't move. Well, it turns out that if you survey, and say in McKinsey Global Institute, if you survey companies, they can't fill positions. I have open positions that I cannot fill. And those numbers are super high. Every year at LinkedIn, I start with a certain budget for headcount hires, and every year at the end of the year, about 20% is not met. And it's not because we're lazy and we're not interviewing, and it's not because, whatever reason you can think of, we're trying very, very hard. And I can see some of you can say, well, but wait a minute, the Silicon Valley, it's competitive pressure. Well, LinkedIn is hiring globally. We have an office in India, we have an office in Europe, we have an office in New York, in Omaha, San Francisco, and if we needed to have an office in Sydney, we would open one. So we're hiring globally. It doesn't matter where you're from. And I cannot hire enough still. And now I told you that the problem is hard. What is that delight? So how do I go back, and if I give you a job recommendation, I tell you, you know what, maybe this is the thing for you. What does it actually mean? What is the metric that I'm defining from it? But the delight to some extent is on alignment, right? If you think about it, is that the company that I'm working for has the vision that I'm trying to do. If I'm passionate about, let's say, saving whales, that's really what I'm 24/7. Wouldn't you be great if you work for an organization that is attempting to do so? That you have the match? Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be empowering? Then you might tell you, well, but maybe the culture, the way that they're going about their business, I think is completely unethical. Well, so you have to have that culture fit also. The empowerment, I need to feel that I can make a difference at whatever that I do. Because I'm representing that company, I believe in it, I can make a difference. A smile here, a smile there carries a lot. And then growth. Okay, where am I going? Now this is kind of tricky because growth doesn't mean that you need to stay within that company for the rest of your life. That paradigm has exploded some years ago and it will most likely never come back. So from this, the next step is, okay, how do I go from A to Z so that I can actually iterate? If I look at it, well, confirmed hires is a metric that you can look at, right? So you did recommendations, people get hired, okay, maybe I can use this. The latency around that is rather high. Maybe it's all about application per impression. So I impress a job, if you apply to it, and that must be a great thing. Well, at least don't do views per impression, because views per impression, you may have clicked by mistake, etc., etc. So application is really actually already taking some effort from you to apply for a job. So that's a good metric. Qualified application, you might say, maybe even better. But if you use qualified application, it means that you actually really qualified for that job. Well, that's also the algorithm that you're going to use in order to show the impression. It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that you're going into. Maybe reducing time to hire. If I can speed up the whole process and reduce time to hire is also a good metric to actually look at. As I'm describing all of these, there's probably one that you never thought of. And that one is minimize outrage. I told you it's about delight, not outrage. What do I mean by this? Well, our algorithms are probabilistic, right? And sometimes a config deployment doesn't really go that well. There's a bug someplace and we don't catch it. And let's say my boss sees this. My boss is the head of engineering and operations at LinkedIn. He thinks of himself as a very accomplished person in the business, which he is. So if he gets a job, hey, Kevin, LinkedIn thinks you should be an intern. Well, he knows me. He would come at my desk and say, I don't have an office. So he comes at my desk, hey, what the heck's going on? And that's all in joke because he's at LinkedIn, right? So he knows me and we can interact with each other. But imagine this. Let's say you're a woman. You took a maternity leave. You're out of the workforce for, let's say, 6 months. And LinkedIn sends you, and you've been, let's say, a high-powered exec before, and LinkedIn sends you an email, hey, you should be a clerk. And then you're like, well, wait a minute, what is LinkedIn doing? Does it believe, etc., etc., etc.? And it raises the outrage. So now if you were to just look at these, the reaction that you'll get, that outrage would just be visceral. So delight on one hand has this, is great, but outrage is also visceral. In your metric, it won't show because, well, you know what, I just get 0 clicks. That's fine, so I'm going to try to not to optimize. But that impression is extremely costly to you. It's actually hindering the credibility of everything that you do. If you look at it, you say, wow, but I can deal with it. By just looking at, well, how long have you been in the industry? And this is from the time that you finished college, that you joined the industry, and different curves, x-axis is time and y-axis is the frequency. The blue line is software engineer. The red and yellow or green lines are different titles of senior and software engineers. And the yellow line is CEO. Well, if you've been away from the industry, from your college for a long time, you're probably not a software engineer. You probably have moved on to other. So you might say, well, I can deal with it this way, in order to not give you that outrageous position that is completely demeaning to what I have accomplished. Then we dig in a little bit and we look at, well, if I just look at seniority, and the plot on the left is the seniority of the job that you're applying to, and different colors is the seniority that you have. Like, for example, if I'm a director, I'm the red curve, and it looks like that I'm applying for jobs mostly between seniority 3 and 6. So seniority 2 is a software engineer, it's an entry-level job. Seniority 8 is the CXO. And right there you say, well, wait a minute, it looks like they all look the same. Doesn't matter whether you were a CXO before, you're still applying for entry-level jobs. So your algorithm in itself will going to say, well, so it's fine. I should send you this entry-level job because it looks like people actually are applying for this entry-level job. On the right is the job and the seniority, the other side. And it looks the same. So you look at it and say, whoa, wait a minute, something is going on here. And as you spend a bit more time, it just tells you that, well, seniority is not independent of the company. And as you get to that insight after some years, you say, well, I was just stupid not seeing it before. What do I mean by this? Well, if I look at company transitions, there's a path. And here are some statistics that are from LinkedIn search engine, so you can all do it. So I'm not disclosing anything here. What I did is I went and I searched for current companies on the left and previous companies on the right. So for example, I look at who is currently employed at Oracle that was previously employed at Microsoft. And there's 1,535 people. I looked at who is currently employed at Oracle and was previously employed at Yahoo. And that's 211 people. Of the currently employed at Oracle, there's 1,948 people that were employed into one of these other 4 companies. And vice versa, if you look at the margins, there's 3,591 people that were previously employed by Oracle that are no longer employed by Oracle. Okay? Rather simple thing. 2 by 2, well, no. two-dimensional table with margins, great. If you look at the summaries, it gives you an interesting story. Turns out that Yahoo is actually losing 2/3 of the employees, quote unquote, on their statistics. And I know there's people from Yahoo here who have great respect for the company. That's the numbers. Same thing for Oracle and Microsoft. About 50%, right? And Google and Facebook are gaining. So seniority and company matters. The company that you're going to go to matters also. Is it perceived as a better thing or not? Is it perceived as something that have more impact or not? It just matters. If you put that into your model, the models work better. You're minimizing that outrage at least. Then you can think about, wait a minute, I understand all of that. What about geography? If I look at Austria, at a high level of a country, if I look at Austria, they're about, from our same data, you have about 108 more people that came from Hungary to Austria than went from Austria to Hungary. So there are transitions across borders, right? It turns out that also Austria is losing a lot of talent to Germany and Switzerland. And you can look at, okay, what are the skills of those individuals that move over? And it turns out that they're losing a lot of individuals from Austria to the other countries that have a background in social media marketing. So you start seeing, okay, what is it that makes people migrate from place A to place B in this economic context? When I saw this, it was kind of strange because there's a company in Austria that's very good at marketing, that has a very nice brand, so it was kind of surprising for me that people wouldn't move. Another way to look at it is, let's say, within a country. And a couple of interesting insights. Here's Seattle. And what you're looking at is, of people who are in Seattle, where do they go? Within a certain framework for the next opportunity. Where do they go? It turns out that about 67% of them stay in Seattle. Make sense? Now, moving away is not such an easy proposition. And where do they move if they go? Well, it turns out that they go to San Francisco, Portland, New York, and these are just ranked by order. But 67% stay local. So if you're going to try to figure out what would make an individual happy, well, probably staying local. If you look at Madrid, actually the number is 75%. So we all know that the economic condition in Spain is much worse than the one in US, and if you compare Madrid to Seattle, you might say, wait a minute, that doesn't really make sense. And if they leave, the left arrow is going to New York, and but the other destinations are really Paris, London, and Barcelona. If you take these geographical preferences within your model, what you end up having is about a 20% lift on your metric. So it does matter. It's not just a futile exercise into trying to understand. There's another side to it, which is actually also very interesting. This is a map of competition for talent for firefighters. If you're in red, it's that the competition for talent is higher than the average. If you're in gray, it's about average, and if it's green, it's below average. It turns out that apparently the competition for talent for firefighters is lower in Miami than it is in San Francisco. And if you look at the red dots, they make perfect sense. In some places, that's where raging fires have occurred just recently. But now if you are in dire need of, you might say, maybe there's some arbitrage game that we can play here from a geography perspective. If you're inclined to move, why not? As you're trying to figure out if you're inclined to move, one of the things that you're going to certainly look into is, who do you know? What are your connections? Because in the end, we are a social network. What are your connections? And in here you see Austria is heavily connected, more the entropy, if you want, more likely than the rest of other countries. Austria is more connected to Slovenia than any other region that we have in our database. Well, it makes sense. Slovenia is a neighborhood, right? I was actually born in Slovenia, so I know. But it's also very connected to St. Gallen, which is in Switzerland, which is actually also next door, and to Munich, for example, which is also a competitive area really close. So there's some places where you're heavily connected across borders. The other interesting thing also on connections is, a cool thing which we looked at is, well, if people are leaving your job, your company, in your network, are you more likely to leave or not? And on the x-axis is the number of people, colleagues in your, who left in the last 6 months, and on the y-axis is the likelihood that you will leave in the last 6 months. So if more people have left, guess what? The data tells you, yes, you're more likely to leave. So there's some participation of what your network is actually endeavoring or doing. Now, as you're building your models for jobs in this situation, there's certainly different dimensions that you're going to consider. And that's what we do at LinkedIn. Well, one is the candidate's view. Am I likely to move or not? The first question that you got to answer yourself is, do I want to move or not? When you're hiring someone, the first thing that you're tackling as a question is, do they want to move or not? Are they ready to make that step? Because moving from one to another place is really hard. Then is this an interesting position? And as you start drilling in, there's a certain set of features that you can think about. Then the job position. The job has a description. Then you're building up your algorithms across. And the one that we use is more of a logistic framework with tons of features within it. And it's also kind of a two-step, because what we do is we look at whether there's a match, and then we tailor it whether you're actually interested into moving or not. Like if you look naively at the profile and I have a job that's open, this is the best candidate, but guess what? That individual doesn't want to move. Well, then it's irrelevant for you. You're not interested into that job in both ends. It's not creating delightful experience if I just give you that job. And lastly, you look at the organization fit. Would you fit in that organization? And that's really hard for us to actually infer. It's much easier for IBM to infer. What is a delightful experience at IBM for IBMers? For us to infer that from the outside is extremely hard. From IBM, from the inside, it's much easier. Google has done it for their employees, right? We know that, they talked about it. But for us, it's much harder. But nevertheless, it doesn't mean that you need to actually think about it. How do I bring that in? Would you be that fit? Having said that, I'll put 2 disclaimers. Gender will never participate as a variable, neither would age, nor race. And that's because, not only because law prohibits us to do it, but because it's also the right thing to do. And if you do that, then you bring that delightful experience, if you work on it. We're certainly not here yet at LinkedIn, but we certainly work very hard on it, on that specific problem of building this job matching. So I took a lot of your time, and I give you the context of what we do at LinkedIn. I told you what are the steps that you should actually make sure that you go through, because if you don't, you end up by having garbage out. And I went through one use case that I believe is actually really, really hard and could use a lot of your talent and a lot of your thoughts on it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that very interesting talk. So I'm sure there are a couple of questions. Would start.
And feel free to ask any questions, even on the things that I haven't covered or very quickly brushed over.
I have the mic. Okay, I have a job for you. Let's try to decrease the economic waste. So here's how. Excuse me for the oversimplification. Basically, your objective is to increase the product delight, while the objective of this community is to increase the publication count. This creates a lot of economic waste, and so I wonder if you could basically propose a couple of problems that this community could work on to kind of basically bridge the gap between university and academia. And one example could be why offline tests show again, but A/B tests don't show again. Just to give an example of a concrete thing that you could state.
Dave, it's an unending list of things that would be...
But you have time only for 3.
Yeah, I'll do my best. For example, when we did the economic graph challenge, what we really went after is there are some questions that we don't know that we should ask ourselves. And then the academic community will reach out to it and say, just tell us, what are those? Knock yourself sitting on our data to give us the question that you think should be relevant and work on it. And that was the purpose of the economic graph. So on one side is we do not know what necessarily are all the questions. Offline training pipelines and making sure that how they adapt to online is a tremendous amount of work that would be great to know how to actually get better at it, because the closer it is offline to online performance, the faster the iteration. There are lots of things, like for example, how do you bring in budget constraints in ads targeting? How do you actually model that, and how do you actually build that into your replays? Advertisers come in, maybe they're a possible model or not, they have a certain budget, they compete on that budget. How do you play that? There's another much more fundamental one, is how do you sample with virality? Today, LinkedIn is a social network. I launch an experiment. What do? I go on my experimental platform, I describe different variables, and these are the people that you're going to run your experiment on. Well, guess what? If I'm running, let's say, an experiment to make the feed more interactive, to increase the discussions in the feed, and I'm in that experiment and you're not, but we connected, well, I'm cutting the virality of that feature, and I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to sample with virality, because that depends on your network. That's a fundamental problem. Then different compute mechanisms. Today, let's say 6 years ago, we picked Hadoop. We could have picked another platform, and we decided to move away from what we had to Hadoop. Then 2 years ago, we said, you know what, Spark seems to be the right choice, so let's invest into it. But what is after? GPUs? How would that play into the algorithms that we have? Spark is very nice. It's making ourselves much faster. But if you look at the algorithms that we are using in order to leverage Spark, is you don't reshuffle data in between steps. You partition your data, then you iterate, and it's pretty much what the nice thing that Spark does. It's in memory. It's much faster than the Hadoop step, which is a lot of IOs. Great, but I never shuffle the data partitions. If I do that, then I'm getting back into the old days of what Hadoop was really bad at. Now, does it matter? Should I, shouldn't I? If I did, wouldn't my algorithms converge much faster? Would I get to better solutions? I don't know. That is certainly some place where we can benefit from the help. And I wouldn't necessarily call it waste, because opportunity, when you're looking at the edge of quote-unquote science, there are lots of ways that are going to come up with it. Not everything that you do will be successful. But a lot of the things that you do will, and that can have a tremendous impact. Make sense? There's one hand here, and there's one hand up there. And there's one hand up there. Yeah, I saw you, don't worry.
I have a question about a scientific method that you were showing quite late in the number of steps. And so I was really excited that then the whole last part of the talk was kind of a scientific method about what does it mean to delight our users. And I'm wondering, so in scientific method with algorithms, we say, oh, this class, this family of algorithms can't work because it's not going to scale, or it can't work for some other reason. And so science is kind of about saying we have a family of problems or a family of criteria, and we have a family of solutions, and we're going to try to generate knowledge about which ones work, which ones don't. Is that something that you try to do with Delight? Like, do you try to generate a knowledge base of these are the kind of things that can delight and can't delight? Or do you just say, hey, you have an idea, we have a bunch of users, do rapid iteration, we'll A/B test it and see if it works?
Very good question. My background is statistics. And through my career, there's this field of machine learning that popped up. I looked at it and said, that's statistics, what the heck? Then on the other side, you have individuals who say, well, I just plug in features, I click the button, my thing works, and voila. And I was, wait a minute, no, you need to understand what your model does. You need to understand how your features are. You need to understand what the model is actually good at or not. What are the fundamental assumptions behind the model? You need to really fundamentally understand them. And I'm talking to a machine learner who says, no, it's just a black box. It works. No, yes, I mean, in this situation, it does matter. The delight that I'm actually hitting from the perspective of a company, if you want, it's those product experiences. But we encounter that through all the layers of what we do. If we don't understand what we're doing and it works, is that good? Do you get any pleasure from that? Not really. I mean, it's great that you move something someplace, but you don't understand it. And if you don't understand it, it also hits in a place where you don't know how it functions, and then you're going to make tons of mistakes. It's kind of a random shot in the dark. It's going to work a couple of days, and then it's not going to work, and you don't know why. So it does. On the other hand, spending a tremendous amount of time really figuring out what the methodology is or isn't, and there are two that are sort of very similar, and the fundamental assumptions are there. I wouldn't overburden it also, but on the other hand, I would certainly not discard it. Certainly not. I wish machine learners would spend more time understanding what the tool is good at and what isn't, compared to just use this and it works. Certainly. And it occurred to us at the beginning. One of my interview questions for a data scientist, very early on, 6, 7 years ago. The interview lasts quite a long time, but my question quite often was, pick any method that you want, anyone. Which one that you feel more comfortable with, and explain it to me. That's it. And when we go into a dialogue, it's not like an exam. Go on the whiteboard and do it. Oh, let's interact. But pick any you want. And you'd be surprised. They had no idea. And you're like, oh, what do I do now? Understand what you're using. Understand your tools. That's one of the first steps of craftsmanship. I think there's over there.
Hi. I have two questions, but both relates to the engagement, active or disengagement. So the first question is, it seems like the disengagement is sort of relates to unwillingness. So in order to, I'm thinking like to avoid that for each company. Of course, there's some ways that during the work, there's communications that you can do. But let's say before individuals get to that job, what kind of things that you can do during the hiring process that can identify the like willingness and unwillingness. And the second question is, it looks like a lot of technical companies in Silicon Valleys are kind of following a process of, instead of having just one hiring managers, usually, like, let's say if I were to go on to onsite for an interview, it's like you're meeting a team of like 6 to 10. So let's say based on the numbers you have like 2 to 1. So if I'm lucky, I get 2 actively engaged your colleagues, then I will get 4 actively disengaged colleagues. So how do you see like this kind of thing?
I get to work rather early. I try to beat traffic, and my kids go to schools rather early, so I leave with them, which means I get to work around 20 to 8, 7:40. It's not 6 in the morning, it's not 5. I get to work 20 to 8. There's a woman at the desk. Every time I come in, she has a great smile. Very positive, open, and just seeing her and having that smile, and at times she helps me open the door, etc., etc. She's so positive about it. Makes my days incredible from the beginning, compared to if somebody just understandably, not every job is going and walking on the moon. But there's a way that you can approach it. Now, I don't know exactly what all the factors come in, but certainly it does make a difference. Now, The other question, I didn't really get it around the Silicon Valley. It's true that we do a lot of on-site, and it's true that maybe the numbers that I showed you, I could have actually colored it by region, and I can do that also. But the point there was more is that there's some steps that you're willing, or companies that are attractive to you, a different perspective of your time. I could also have a filter it by that. What are the companies that you should go at the beginning of your career? What are the companies that should go in the middle of your career? What are the companies that should go at the later stage of your careers? What are these? And they all have different things. It's a little bit of a misnomer to believe that a company is going to hold you forever. That it's going to be great for your beginning of your career to later stage and in the end. There's got to be something within it. Of course, every company would say, no, we're the best one ever. I don't necessarily believe that it's really the case. And sure, there's in the data that I showed, I looked around, so what are the companies around me that I know about, and I got the data, hey, it confirmed my hypothesis. So I framed the numbers, certainly.
I would like to step into your answer. So, given that you more or less predict what company would be right at the right stage to the right person, isn't there also a risk that you are losing diversity within the company?
That's what I was trying to figure out, how to walk to the right house last night. Not really, because you're not hindering on, I see your point, but you're not really hindering on removing some dimensions around the diversity. It would be like, for example, for a company, in order to be great, they need that diversity. One thing that I loved at LinkedIn when I joined in is that people were from all over the world. When we were 170, you had maybe 60 countries. It's not like you have one block of 60 people from the US and 3 from somewhere else. Not at all. We were from all over the place. And we celebrated that. Like, one of the early decorations that we had in our cubicle is just flags. Where are you from? And there are flags everywhere. That was great, and we embraced it. In the end, I think that allowed us to create a product that is more international in its sense than just the US. Granted, it's still very much tailored to it because it's in English. But I think I can see your point that essentially if you do it wrong, what you'll end up by having is you have one set of individuals because you think that's the organizational fit.
Yeah, and not only from a geographical diversity point of view, but definitely from maybe from an attitude point of view, from more values and so on.
Correct. You had a question?
Hi, thanks for your talk. I have a couple of questions for you. First one is, given that you're the VP of Engineering, what role does design play into that? Because there is a big part of interaction design that comes in the whole user experience aspect, and how does that impact the algorithms, etc. Secondly is, when you talk about new job recommendations, right, for potential job seekers, now typically I've seen, at least in my personal use, if the recommendations that will come up are very similar to what I've worked at in the last, let's say, 5 years. And not often is that the case where it's just because you work here. So I'm wondering if someone wants to break out into a new industry, is there what are some things that go into the novelty aspect of the recommendations?
So design. Design is super important. I was talking to Zenk yesterday, and then you may believe that everything is driven by, let's say, our recommendation system, that we're moving the metric if we do a great work. The effect of the usability, the effect of the design is sometimes orders of magnitudes better than the other one. It doesn't mean that you say, you know what, forget about doing any machine learning, whatever, because in the end you still want to have that relevance coming in. But the design aspect is actually one that is super critical. The way that you can actually ask yourself now, is design experience or gut? I have an idea how this thing should work, therefore I'm going to do it. It's kind of let's say the Steve Jobs approach. I have this brilliant idea, it's going to work this way, and I don't care if numbers don't show it because I know. Or are you more experimental driven? I'm going to try, I'm going to tinker around it. And I tend to think that in this space, they both play. Intuition allows you to actually go into a different universe. Experimentation allows you to actually figure out what's in that universe. But experimentation in itself will never get you to a different universe. It's too far. If you want the cone of possibilities is restricted to where you are. And you can extend it a little bit, but you're not going to go there. The second question was on... Yeah. There's one great product that LinkedIn attempted to do 4 or 5 years ago. And it was more around career than just your next job. We just didn't have the quality of the data, neither the patience to do it well. Yes, it's intuitive, and it goes into your question about diversity. Well, I figured out what you've done in the past, and you just a plus epsilon, this is what you should do next. Compared to, maybe you should try that over here. Kind of the same thing between design and experiment. That's what we would want to do. That's, I think, what we should try to attempt to deliver on. And just looking at the career trajectories of individuals in the past doesn't mean that these are the ones that you would want to take. There's something within what you're doing that I know that is of interest to you. I mean, in the end, LinkedIn is a publishing platform. Per week, we have roughly 150,000 articles, I believe, that are long-form posts that are from influencers to everybody. So I know what interests you. I know what are the things that sort of drive your interest, which may be in the current profession and maybe something different. Now, it's not for me to tell you, that or this, but I can have that dialogue with you. And there, the delightful experience is probably as much the flow and the design than the things that I'm going to show you. It's more a dialogue between the two of us than me saying this or that. And it's really hard. That is a problem that I would really love to make a significant dent in the near future.
Okay. Over there.
Thanks. Earlier in your talk, you briefly touched on an example in which delight and revenue were in conflict. My own delight in Twitter is diminishing as they put promoted things in front of me. I suppose the conventional wisdom is if you favor delight, then in the long term it aligns with revenue. Is that always true? Do you have examples where that isn't the case? Would it be the case where you would want to put revenue ahead of delight?
So, naively, the question, naively, yes, there's an incompatibility between quote-unquote delight and revenue. If you show me an ad, how delightful can that be? I'm not in the process of buying X, Y, and Z. I don't want to see an ad. I'm trying to get knowledge in my, let's say, professional career. That's why I use the application. It turns out, actually, that that's not necessarily true. That, like for example, if I look at the feed at LinkedIn, there's ads in places. The delightful experience is that when that thing is as relevant as something that somebody in my network shared, right? To get to that level is actually hard. But I would have said that the marketers actually have figured it out also. And maybe through the experience that they've built through search. One of the reasons that the ads work very well in Google is that because if you type in a keyword, the ad itself is as relevant to that keyword than the search results, the organic results. They're relevant to that keyword. Most of the time. Sometimes it's like, I don't know, you search for one brand of car company and you get another car company as an ad. Well, I'm trying to steal traffic. Okay. But most of the time it is. Now, if you look at the feed, what you're trying to figure out, and what they've done is, the content that I'm seeing is actually super interesting. And if that is the case, then you're merging the two. Now, of course, if you're going to say, oh, but we need to optimize for revenue, well, what are you going to do? You're just going to show ads. Is that a delightful experience? No. If you want to optimize just for delight, you may show less and less ads, and only in the places where they actually really matter. And what we've done at LinkedIn is we have a core value that we put always our members first, which actually then parallels very nicely to this delightful experience. It's actually not always the case that you can create that delight, but I think you should strive. The more you get into that space, the more engagement you have within your product, the better it's going to work. The ecosystem is going to be much better.
Okay, I think we are heading now for lunch, and Igor will be available. I think if there are any further questions, I would have a short one on the code of ethics internally with respect to all business opportunities that would derive out of this HR analytics applications that might only require a short answer.
Okay. Bon appétit.
Yeah.
I'll meet you at the desk over there if you want. Thank you.